Forgiveness is one of those things that we think it's generous to the other person when really, forgiveness is all about giving to you. Because certainly if you carry that anger, the guilt, the resentment that you have towards someone, those are the emotions that are flooding through your body. And that those lead to neurobiological changes that are happening inside your body, telling your body you're in stress. So you're actually giving yourself poison, hoping the other person is going to be hurt. And so that's really great that you mentioned that. And certainly forgiveness for yourself, because not forgiving to yourself, you've got, again, those emotions of guilt and shame. And those two emotions we know do the same thing. It increases the inflammatory response in your body. It will actually drop your immune system. So, I'm really glad you brought that piece up on forgiveness. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State podcast. I'm your host, Dr. V, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. Today, we actually talk about a medicine that is key for optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. And you hear about it when you listen to my book, Thrive State. That when we are able to tap into the most authentic versions of us, who we are meant to be, how we are meant to express ourselves out in the world, we tap into a life force, an energetic life force. I call it the Thrive State. And that energy, what we feel, that feeling of aliveness, actually activates our genes on an epigenetic level. It actually turns on the genes that code for longevity, health, and peak performance. And that medicine is self-love and authenticity. It might sound cliche because it's used in a lot of social media memes that are out there, but it is definitely true that when we live a life through mask of not being who we are because of the wounds and traumas that we've had in our past, showing up inauthentically actually drives the stress response in our body that increases inflammation, that lowers our immune system, which puts us prone to chronic symptoms and chronic disease. Now, before we get into our podcast guest who's going to unravel this process for us, I just want to welcome everybody into the Thrive State podcast. If you are new, welcome to this place. This is a place where I get to interview world thought leaders and experts in health, longevity, peak performance on how to get you and how you can achieve the Thrive State. If you haven't already done so, please consider helping the show grow. If this show is giving you value, please help it grow by subscribing to it, engaging with our content, hitting that like button, turning on those notifications, and leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. Certainly, if it does bring you value, please share this with your friends and family members so that they have an opportunity to learn more of this important information as well. And for all you who have been following along and you haven't done so yet, let me give you some free resources. I've got two for you. One is a bundle of lecture notes from my global keynote topic that has all the frameworks in slides on a PDF form, a ebook on how to thrive to 105, as well as breathwork exercises that you could use throughout the day to tap you into resourceful states of calm, of energy, of vitality, so that you could perform your best no matter what the day calls for. You can receive all that information at thrivestatestarter.com. Now, some of you have taken my online course, the Thrive State Accelerator, which you could find at mythrivestate.com. And, going through the course, we have actually given out worksheets, journal prompts, and all the cliff notes on how to get into the Thrive State. And I want to give all that to you, this toolkit on how to achieve the Thrive State for anyone who's listening, absolutely free. Go to mythrivestate.com/toolkit to get that free resource. Again, this is just my gift to you, a free gift for anybody who wants to dive deeper into the content to take themselves to the next level. Just a big thank you from me to you. Now, on to today's guest. You would have heard me on her podcast, the Passion, Love, Pursuit podcast. She is Erica Lippy, an integrative life and wellness coach, ambitious entrepreneur, and a distinguished personal development podcast host, which has her podcast ranking in the top 1% of podcasts listened worldwide. I definitely recommend you go to her podcast, subscribe, listen to our episode, the one that I did with her, because weekly she brings in captivating guests, experts, industry leaders, individuals with profound life journeys, and she creates and curates these engaging and enriching conversations aimed at empowering listeners to ignite transformative change. And coming this fall, she's going to be launching a Reignite Your Light program, which helps women reclaim their inner radiance, awaken and realign their true selves. So, women listening, definitely check it out. And the men who've got women that they want to support, whether it be their daughter, their sister, their mother, please send them, have them check this out. I really encourage you to use this resource to raise the women around you in your life. So please enjoy this conversation on discovering authenticity and self-love with myself and Erica Lippy. Erica Lippy, welcome to the Thrive State Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. It was such a pleasure to connect with you on my show as well. So I'm glad we could swap positions and get into a different conversation here. So thank you for holding the space.
I am so excited because we'll be talking a lot about self-love and authenticity today. And really, if people dive into my work, and my audience already knows this, that authenticity and who we are and how we show up in that space is actually the key to unlocking health and performance in our life. So can't wait to dive in there. But before we do, there's a segment of the show called the 5 to Thrive. 5 quick questions, game show style, 1,000 points each. And if you win, you get a healthy meal on me the next time we meet. So the question to you is, are you ready to play the 5 to Thrive?
Let's go. I'm excited.
Here we go. Question number 1 for 1,000 points is, guilty pleasure do you have when you need a moment to relax and unwind?
I love lately chips and salsa. So give me some chip salsa and guacamole, and I will have a very hard time stopping, to say the least.
1,000 points there. Question number 2, if you could have dinner with any celebrity, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask them?
Ooh, yeah, I'm just going to go with the first thing that came to mind. Oprah. Highly respect the woman she is and the wisdom she shares today. What would I ask her? Out of everything she has learned from the brilliant minds she has interviewed, what has been the biggest takeaway that has radically changed her life?
Beautiful. 1,000 points there. Question number 3 is, what is the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning?
Besides the obvious, I will splash my face with cold water, and then I will lather on some oil and I'll massage my face just to wake up and feel that instant refreshing feeling and open my eyes and just ready to go into my next morning routine.
Oh, beautiful. 3,000 points, 4,000 points here is, let's plug your podcast. What is the name of it? And what's your favorite episode of your podcast and why?
Ooh, okay. Passion, Love, Pursuit podcast, available on most platforms. And that is very hard to narrow down to one episode. So I'm just going to go with what comes to mind first. So I would say Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., which is the son of Don Miguel Ruiz that wrote the 4 Agreements. And as most people probably have read that book, it's quite impactful. It's top, I think, 20 books of all time. And the whole family speaks about this Toltec wisdom that they speak on. And it's really impactful, and it's simple concepts that you could put into your everyday life. So I just loved that conversation. It was just such an honor to hold the space to have that.
Super awesome. And I hope people listen to that episode. Last question is, do you have a secret talent that people might be surprised of knowing?
Okay. I would say staying the same size within a quarter inch for over 20 years. And the reason why I say that is because the career that I fell into is called fit modeling. And so that's a live mannequin for clothing manufacturers. So because of that career, it has led me to stay the same size because that's what the job requires. And so I've mastered my body and have the ability to maintain that. And so I guess that's my secret weapon.
5,000 points, you win the Five to Thrive, which means healthy meal on me the next time we get to hang out in real
Amazing.
life.
Will
Um,
you be at the biohacking conference coming up?
Not this year. I'll be speaking at a
Okay.
different event, but yeah, spoke there several times. And so definitely check it out. Dave Asprey's, go to biohackingconference.com to check it out. Now,
Okay.
I'm really excited to dive into today's episode. One is, I don't know if it's a taboo topic of self-love, and so many people talk about that, but we'll dive into just why it is so important and also authenticity. Authenticity is something that I think if we could just tap back into who we are as a soul trying to express itself out in the world and not live by the masks that maybe we got conditioned to live with, we activate this life force in our body that drives epigenetic change for us to live longer and for us to be able to perform our best. So I'm just going to kick this over to you initially, and you can tackle one or the other first. Either, why do you think there is an epidemic of people not having access to self-love? Or a related question, why do you think people end up living inauthentic lives?
There's a lot to unpack in that simple question, right? And I think the reason why is a lot of us weren't given the tools. Our parents didn't teach us, like, how do you love yourself and how do you be your authentic self? I think it's just we weren't equipped with that early on. And so, as we live our lives, creating these stories and these beliefs based on what we grew up in and our peers that we surround ourselves with. So, all these stories and these limitations in the way we live in the world creates these masks that we wear. And so we become so detached from who we truly are. And so I think that's really the problem. And I know it's such a cliche word, authenticity, self love, and all these things and these concepts are really great. But what is it really? And I think it's really about not being something that we think we should be, but embracing all that we are. And who are we? That's really the question, is how do we discover? And we talked about this on my podcast, and you went into this, is like the discovery of. And I think really it comes down to is creating the space so that you could become more aware of really what is going on. And I think because we're in this world where there's constantly noise, we're constantly doing the next thing, we don't have that quiet time, that space to actually reflect on really what we're feeling. What are these stories? What are these limitations that are holding me back? And I think when we start to look at that in the form of maybe journaling, and asking ourselves these questions, and most importantly, being honest with the answers, then we could reveal who we truly are and why are we not living possibly in alignment? What are these stories that I'm holding on to that's limiting me from being all that I want to be? And so I think, initially, as you asked that question, what's really limiting us why we haven't been living in authentic alignment or in self-love is we really weren't taught it. And so thankfully, where we are in the world today, there's so many resources available. I mean, we're listening to podcasts that are free. And so I think if you're curious enough, is research these things and you can learn more about how could you get there? How could you develop self-love and cultivate it in your everyday?
Yeah, I would probably say for me, getting to a point where I was overworked hospital doctor, realizing at that point I was living this mask that I needed something external outside of myself, a job title, career prestige, a house, a car, for me to feel worthy. And it was just driving my health down the toilet. And I had to take a deep look in the mirror to go, how are you living your life? And did you consciously make these choices or not? Was there a pivotal moment in your life where you're like, wow, you know what, maybe I am wearing a mask that I need to take off?
Oh, so much. And I think everybody can relate to what you just shared in some aspect, because I think so many of us seek validation outside of us to tell us we're loved, we're worthy, we're seen, we're heard. And that's exactly what my journey was, is really seeking love. And because I started dating at a very young age, I was actually 11, but so I dated somebody for a year when I was 11, which is crazy young. But really, when I was 13 to 23, I was actually in a long-term relationship with somebody that was 3 years older. So think about 13 and 16, vast difference in age. And the reason why I bring that up, because it really set the foundation for my life going forward. And the reason being is I didn't even know myself yet. And I don't even think when you're 16, you don't know yourself yet. But because I was so young, I was very impressionable. And because I wanted to be loved, accepted by my partner at the time, I was loving what he loved. And I was, like becoming him in some way. And in that relationship, I was emotionally abused. So that also confirmed some of the beliefs I already had about myself, the stories of I'm not smart enough, I'm not lovable, and all these things, these little stories that I would carry around for so long. But the changing moment, like going forward through my relationships, I realized there kept on being a pattern. And finally, it hit me. And let's say this was, if I could think about timing, maybe 8 years ago, where I realized like another relationship I was in ended. It was hot and then it went cold really fast. And I was like, why does this keep happening? Like, enough is enough. I'm tired of it. Something's has to change for something to change. And so that's when I finally diving back into the personal development work. I worked with my life coach again, the third time. And I said, okay, this time it's going to be different. I'm going to hire her again. I'm going to be very intentional with my time. I'm not going to be driving to the next thing while having a call with her. I'm going to sit down, journal, really do the work. And so what really changed in that moment, it was the radical responsibility I took. Instead of these things like, oh, it's that guy, he's just not ready, and making up all these excuses. And some of it could be true. But I started to turn the mirror on myself and just say, like, why are you not respecting yourself? Why aren't you not keeping your word? Why aren't you not helping or holding healthy boundaries? And so when I did that, that's when it really just hit me like, you don't love yourself. Like, you really don't value your worth. And why are those stories there? And I just started dissecting everything and just like peeling the onion and just kept on asking, why this, why that? And so as you talked about in your journey, is realizing living this life kind of unconsciously. And so that's when I did this work, I started to look at everything as it's a conscious no or a conscious yes. Like, it's either this is in alignment and I'm going to be very intentional with it, or it's a no. So I just got really clear on my values and I started to get clear on what made me feel alive and what didn't, and said consciously no to those things that didn't feel good. So that's when I just started to make the change. So that was pretty much the journey I went through of discovering really what was going on that was holding me back from everything I desired.
Going back to somebody who might just be waking up to the fact that maybe they haven't been loving themselves their entire life, what does that process of rediscovery look like? I know you've got 6 steps or 6 principles to reconnect with your authentic self. Can we go over what those things are and how people can apply them into their own lives?
Absolutely. And I think personally, this is really helpful. And I think, as I mentioned, the journey I went through was really just turning the mirror on myself. And so through these processes, it's really just taking the time, being with yourself, asking yourself questions, and just gaining clarity. Because first, always the foundation of everything, which is principle number 1, is awareness. You can't intervene in a world you cannot see. So if you're constantly running the muck, working from 9 to 7 p.m. and being busy and looking at social media to distract yourself or whatever it may be, you aren't creating the time and the space to actually look at really what's going on and creating that awareness. So it's really just, honestly, the first thing you need to do is slow down and make the time and the space to ask yourself the questions and really just become aware of what's off and just being in tune with your emotions and just sitting with it and not judging it, just being able to be present with it. So that would be the first, is awareness, always. And then the next one is reflecting. So reflecting. So as I mentioned, like, to know, what are your limitations? What are the stories you're telling yourself? Why are you telling yourself? So you have to really get clear on writing down, what are those narratives you keep saying to yourself over and over, and then questioning them, like looking at them from like bird's eye view. Okay, why do I think that? What is making this seem true to me?
Mhm.
And then dissecting it more and like, where did this story come from? And so really reflecting on that aspect, because those are are your roadblocks. And so if you keep on living those stories and focusing, as they say, where your focus goes, your energy flows. So if you keep focusing on those stories, those will be true. And so then reflecting on, of course, as I mentioned, knowing your values, what's important to you. Like, for example, myself, I didn't really know at the time what my values were. I know what I liked. I know what I wanted. The idea of what you want is not the same as what you actually need. And so I think when you start writing out your values, you come to know yourself more. And this is really where you discover more your authentic self, is gaining clarity on what matters most to you. And that could be, maybe I need to feel peace, because let's say you grew up in a house that was always chaotic. There was always yelling. And so there's a reason why the high value of peace is necessary for you. And so how do you have more peace? And you have to start looking into that. So if you want to ask questions, I could go into the next one, but
No, real good. Just to recap where we're at with awareness and reflecting, awareness is so key. And so many people don't recognize that there is a narrative because they just think that this is just real life. And just being able to start seeing that there's stories, and that those stories may potentially just live in you and not reality is so key. And you mentioned just about the social media and work and busyness, that those distractions really just keep the program running in your brain, because it doesn't really allow you that time and energy to really be able to process those things. Really key, both in awareness and reflection, is to be able to kind of slow down and to have that time and develop the muscle of awareness. So beautiful. Can't wait for number 3.
yeah. And just to add to that, one of my favorite moments I had that was like an aha moment, and it's so silly and so small, but we carry our phone with us pretty much everywhere we go, right? We have to be constantly connected to the world. There was a time where I was questioning what was the next thing I wanted to do. It was for a program that I wanted to release. And so I was really on the fence, and I felt, oh, I should do this because this reason. But I was always feeling a pull to something else. And so one day I took my dog for a walk, and I'm like, okay, I'll leave my phone at home because I'm a big multitasker. I'm going to leave it at home, and I'm just going to go for a walk. My favorite way to, if you want to say meditate, is walks in nature. So it was a peaceful, beautiful, sunny day, my favorite. And I had no phone, and I was just letting my mind go, but just happened to drop in my mind, this is the path you should go. This is the way. This is what's in alignment. And I got the answer I've been pondering for so long, but it's because I created that time and the space to do it. And so that's the beauty, is if you are into meditation, if you're into walks, if you're just into, sitting in your car and just, no music on and just driving, I think that's a beautiful way to get downloads as well. So moving to the next thing is accepting. So I'm big on self-acceptance, because I personally believe this, what I always talk about is self-acceptance is the pathway to self-love. And the reason being is I don't think many people have accepted the totality of everything that has brought them here at this moment. And so what does that look like? That means your mistakes, those choices, those wrong things you've done, the ways you've failed, you dated the wrong person, lost all that money in a scam, whatever it may be. Like, that happened, but that doesn't mean going forward that you need to lead down that same path. And so accepting, okay, this happened, but today I choose, and I'm able to choose a new reality going forward. And so I get to create the next version of who I'm becoming. And so self-acceptance is basically saying, I accept where I am today, but I love myself enough to not stay there. And I think this is a key component, because self-acceptance can also keep you stuck. Let's be real. So like, I accept myself that I'm overweight and unhealthy, like, because that's self-love, right? Some might think that, but actually self-love would be like, okay, I accept that I'm overweight. I've gotten to this point and I'm unhealthy, but I don't need to stay here because I love myself enough to get healthy and lose this weight. So that's a key thing. So embracing the totality of everything you are and who you truly are. And then the other part of accepting is taking that radical responsibility. As I said, this was the game changer in my life, is when I turned the mirror on myself and said, like, I am responsible as well for the misery I've created in my life. Like, okay, I did that. Oops. Like, now I can make a better choice. And so you are in the driver's seat of your life. Nobody is responsible for where you end up. That is something that we all, as adults, I know, like, when you're a teenager, you don't know better. Like, you're just navigating life. But as adults, we are responsible for where we end up.
I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you are, I just wanted to let you know, join our community. There's so many free resources and a great community of people that desire health, happiness, human potential, to have more in their life, more health, more energy. And when you have those two things together, you could create more happiness, more abundance, whether it be financial, romantic, all these things in your life. And if you're just starting out, you don't know where to go, just sign up for thrivestatestarter.com, because in there you're going to get a bundle of information that includes a longevity ebook, a longevity and performance resource guide, lecture notes that come from my keynotes at Google, at Fortune 500 companies, all the insights in that keynote in lecture slide form given to you. And then finally, breathwork. I share 3 powerful breathwork exercises to access calm, which really gives you clarity and peace during the day, to access energy if you need to wake up and really motivate yourself, and finally a breathwork routine that you could do every single morning so that you could be very intentional with how you create that day. You could find all this stuff delivered free to your inbox at thrivestatestarter.com. And our community is growing. If you want to be a part of a community of people that desire the Thrive State, that are really in Thrive State themselves, and help other people along with that, you could be a part of the community. You can get group coaching from me. We do breathwork sessions, meditation sessions, and you also get to drop in and participate in podcasts in the future. You could find more about the community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. So check out those resources. You're not going to be disappointed. And please enjoy the remainder of this podcast.
And then another piece of this that I think is important to talk about with accepting is forgiveness. As I said, the part of self-acceptance is forgiving yourself for maybe those mistakes or those wrong choices. Self-forgiveness is such an important piece of feeling whole within yourself, and also forgiving others. Because I believe, like, people do the best they can with where they're at. And when they learn more, then they can make better choices. But we could at least be like, okay, they came from a broken childhood, so maybe they don't know how to love because they haven't been taught that. And just forgiving them, that doesn't mean their actions are right, but just being like, I forgive you, and I forgive myself for not knowing better. But now I can make a new choice. So accepting, that's a big, I personally think, well, it's not the most important, but I think it's a big component to really getting back home, like returning you home to yourself.
So good. And I love the piece about forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of those things that we think it's generous to the other person, when really, forgiveness is all about giving to you. Because certainly if you carry that anger, the guilt, the resentment that you have towards someone, those are the emotions that are flooding through your body, and those lead to neurobiological changes that are happening inside your body, telling your body you're in stress. So you're actually giving yourself poison, hoping the other person is going to be hurt. And so that's really great that you mentioned that. And certainly forgiveness for yourself, because not forgiving to yourself, you've got, again, those emotions of guilt and shame. And those two emotions, we know, do the same thing. It increases the inflammatory response in your body. It will actually drop your immune system. So, I'm really glad you brought that piece up on forgiveness.
Yeah, it's so good. I mean, you're the doctor here, and this is there's science behind this of why. And that's why I loved our conversation so much. You talk so much about why being ourself is so correlated to our health.
Yeah.
It's like mind blowing, but it's awesome to know this stuff now. Like it's scientifically proven.
Yeah. What's step 4?
Okay, choosing.
Mm.
So the power of choice, right? We all have choices. And I think what's most important, as I kind of talked about before, is the conscious no's and the conscious yeses. Is so we have to be very intentional in our choices. Intentionality is one of the most beautiful things because then you're living your life intentionally with passion and purpose. There is a reason why you're doing what you do, but without the steps that I've laid out beforehand, how do you know if you're making an aligned choice? So you must go through the other steps beforehand, but it's just being very intentional in your life. And then the next one, as we kind of talked about, is the being aspect. So again, we're all doing things, but how often are we actually being? And so being in stillness, being in peace. I love this saying, if I could make sure to not chop it up, but it's peace is stillness, or sorry, peace is happiness at rest, and happiness is peace in motion. Peace is so essential, and we don't realize how precious it is because we're so inundated with all the noise that it becomes almost normal. I forgot if I shared this with you, but I shared this with another on a podcast that I remember I was so stressed that I didn't even realize I was so stressed because it became normal. But I was aware I'm stressed. I just didn't know like what it was doing to me. And fast forward, it actually gave me health issues.
Mm.
So I realized, and I'm with full certainty because I have most of my life pretty dialed in when it comes to nutrition, movement, and all the things. So I realized the stress I was causing myself obviously was affecting my digestion, my sleep, and then honestly, it led to health issues. I got leaky gut, fun
Mm.
stuff. So there's very much an importance in being. And so it's really being able to like master your energy. And when you notice you're having dis-ease, is to then possibly remove yourself from a situation, take a breath. And you talked about breath work.
Mm.
How important is breath work? I personally love doing the box breath because it's calming. And I need more of that personally than the other type of breath work. So yeah. And then the last step is allowing. I think there's this beautiful flow between giving and receiving. I think so many of us, we want all these things, but are we actually giving? Because it's energy exchange.
Mm.
And so are you allowing by giving more possibly instead of just trying to be like, take, take, take. And the other part is making space for what's coming. And so I think, again, like this comes to understanding like your environment very strongly affects your energy. And so are you decluttering your space? Are you maybe auditing your friendships? I hate to say, but I had to do that. I had to think like, is this serving me? Like when I say serving me, that's actually sounds kind of not correct, but is this adding to my life, this friendship, this energy exchange? Is it aligned? And really questioning that. And it's okay to, know that some friendships are just here for a season, not necessarily for a lifetime. And so I think it's just creating space where space is needed.
I was trying to think of an acronym. I wrote down ARACBA.
It's funny. I haven't done that yet, but it's funny. I should come up with something, but those are the letters right now that I'm
Yeah.
working.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think
Yeah.
if each person like implemented just those steps into moments of their day, they'll just start to develop the muscle of just being a little bit more aware and conscious about how they choose to show up, who they choose to be in life. And so that's a beautiful thing. What would you say sometimes self-love or the lack of self-love shows up in our relationships, both professionally and personally? And how would you say somebody can, well, I guess I want to ask, like, how do you think it shows up in the relationships when they figure out maybe that they don't have self-love, and should they be sticking around a relationship or not when they don't feel that way? I tend to believe that relationships are going to be messy, and you're going to get into relationships that reflect back to you the things in life that potentially you need to work with. And I am triggered sometimes in relationships when I realize that there's a part of me that I don't love, which is why I get triggered when somebody says X or Y. And so I wonder what your experience is when somebody thinks about self-love and their relationships.
It's such a good question. And you kind of touched on it. Relationships are a mirror. They really are. And relationships can be the most triggering. Actually, I think they are, to be honest. I just heard the other day when I was listening to podcasts that your kids are your most triggering. I don't have kids yet, so I can't say that, but I could understand that. Again, it's another relationship, right? And so I think those triggers are there for a reason as signals in your body when you have an illness, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
there to as warning signals, and they're there to tell us something. It's information. And so I think if you're doing this work, if you really want to live, in complete harmony with yourself, if you want to say, and I'm granted we have to be with ourselves the rest of our lives, so you might as well do that. So is really understanding if you're being triggered, just question it. And all of us will be reactionary at first, and that's kind of understandable. I don't know, it's a human experience. Doesn't mean like you should yell. And when you do something that is not kind or loving, you should take ownership and apologize and ask for forgiveness and maybe understanding. But regardless, your work is your work. So the things you're triggered about, and I still, obviously, we all do, we still get triggered. Like it's like we're on this journey through life, evolving and healing and growing. So with those triggers is really being with yourself and questioning why they're here. Like, what is this trying to show me? And how can you do the work to improve yourself? Like, where do you need to grow? But I think that, as far as self-love goes, that comes back to acceptance, like, your reaction, like understanding, like, I know why I reacted to this because this happened to me in my past. And so it's sensitive to me. I just want to be loved and know that I'm heard and that this matters to me. And really just being like, I can love you through this process. But I don't think necessarily you need to end a relationship because they're triggering you, or that, if they're not treating you kindly and they're not treating you lovely or lovingly consistently, then obviously that's a whole nother situation. But I think in the process of really cultivating self-love is always returning the mirror on yourself, to be honest, and I think that could sound overwhelming, but if anything, I think it's empowering as well, because then you have the choice to do something different next time.
Yeah, I could definitely say that relationships have been just the truest mirror. And I didn't realize, but I had these issues of just constantly sabotaging relationships in the past because there were parts of me that never felt like I could be truly loved. And so when it got to that place, I somehow found a way to get out. And then I'm in a committed relationship now, and the same type of triggers start coming up. And now I start to look at it with awareness, with reflection, being able to see, oh, wow, there's this wound of unworthiness that when she says something like this, I show up this way. Where did that wound come from?
Yeah.
And is there something I can give to myself in this moment to not get that trigger? And it's multiple instances like that where if you're willing to be in a space and container with your partner where you allow people to go through each other's process and support each other through this process, you'll find abilities to be able to heal, which is why so many people say that if you don't really do the work in relationship and just start off, you're going to be bound to repeat the pattern over and over again in your next relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that's an important thing to mention is the vulnerability in a relationship. If get to a point in a relationship, maybe not early on, but when if you're both in the space to grow and to evolve and become your best self, you're going to be willing to hold the space for conversations that are painful per se, that are vulnerable, that require work, if you want to say the self-work, but holding that space with your partner to talk about why this made you feel the way it made you feel. And I think then you have this dialogue of understanding, which is really beautiful. And trust me, like my deepest pain has been in relationships, and now he's my fiance. We recently got engaged, but we've been together over 5 years. And there has been things that have come up, especially when we hit the 5 year, because my last relationship was 5 year and we were planning on getting married. So when we hit the 5 year, I got all this, like, I started being triggered and I started like all this anxiety came up and this unworthy, like just all this stuff. And I didn't even, I noticed it was coming up. At the time, the fear was kind of taking over. It was taking the driver's seat, not me. And so I was very reactionary. But knowing now, and again, this is where you're always returning back to questioning things and you're always returning back to self and self-awareness, then you could at least move forward, lessen fear, lessen like those stories that you've been holding on to for so long. So yeah, relationships are triggering.
On to a different topic, but very similar. And I've certainly found it to be a way to rediscover myself is through podcasting. When you bring in guests that pique your interest, that has you think about life and relationships and health maybe differently, you learn to be able to speak in your voice. So it's a really great process to be able to, rediscover yourself. And I know that you are teaching other people how to launch their podcast. So many people feel that there are just so many podcasts out there that if they start one, it will just be, lost in the sea of podcasts out there. Why should people consider still starting a podcast, and how do you successfully launch one without overwhelm?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. First of all, I want to actually acknowledge what you just said because I didn't realize that. That's a good point. I have, because what am I, like over 250 episodes in, it's been over 5 years podcasting. So as you could imagine, there's been such a evolve in it. And I realize that is a great way to discover who you are, what you love, what you're passionate about, having these conversations, making your own. And so you make a really good point. Like, I've realized where my obsession of interest lies when I'm having these conversations. I could tell what makes me come alive. So that's I didn't even realize that. I love that you point that out. But as far as podcasting, as you can see, we're on a podcast, very engaging conversation. Obviously we're both same interests. And so you could have these incredible conversations with people that you admire and you really respect and hold the space and then be able to share it with the world, right? But the reason why anybody should start a podcast, if it's on your heart, I don't think it's for everybody, but if it's on your heart, if you have a message to share or you want to have these insightful conversations with other experts in your field, there is so much space still available. It's still growing all the time, and video more than ever this year, especially video is the prominent space to be in. And so there's ways to monetize it almost out the bat. Not necessarily should you focus on that. It's all about quality and content. But so many people are overwhelmed by there's so many out there and how do I start it? There's so many technology things. What do I need to know? I don't know all these things. It's really simple. And I think we overcomplicate things that are really simple. And so that's why I created this course, because I went through it all on my own, Googling all the things, watching all the videos before I started, with complete imposter syndrome. Nobody knows me. Who will listen? I can't speak well. I have a horrible memory. All those stories I would tell myself that we're talking about, all those limitations. And finally, when I got out of my own way, then I launched my podcast, and it launched pretty well for what I expected. It did better than I expected, if you want to say. And then I just kept with it. I said to myself, okay, I'm going to stick to 100 episodes. I didn't know what 100 episodes would look like, but I'm like, if I could at least get to 100, then I know, like, okay, we could see if this works. And that was just my first, commitment I made, but I just stayed committed and, just started really enjoying the conversations, and just, again, with passion and purpose and intention, then everything else will follow. And so I think it's available for everybody. And I really wanted to simplify it by a step-by-step program that I just felt like, okay, here it is. I went through it. I've been in it for some time. I've learned a thing or two. And this is the program I want to offer you. And you could do it too.
What's the link? We'll put it down in the show notes of how people could take advantage of that program.
Yeah, the link is long, but it's called the Podcast Playbook. It's on my website, ericalippy.com /the podcast playbook. Sorry, it's long, but he could include in the show notes. And it's a really affordable way to just have all the steps necessary so you don't have any overwhelm, so you don't stop yourself in the tracks of all the things that you would think would come with starting a podcast. And so I just want to be able to provide the resource so you could start off successfully without the overwhelm. So the podcast playbook, ericalippy.com.
Awesome. And you're launching a new program, if I recall correctly, in the fall called Reignite Your Light program. And I could only imagine it'd be all the juicy and deliciousness of self-love and authenticity. But can you talk a little bit about who this program is for and what they're going to be able to get?
Absolutely. So it's for the person that feels out of alignment, that just feels like something is off and that you're not living your fullest potential. And enough is enough. You're ready to take charge of your life and take radical responsibility. And it's for the person that wants to feel that aliveness, that wants fulfillment, that wants to really stand in truth and be aligned and live with passion and purpose in every area of your life. Yes, I plan to about fall, release this program, and excited for what's going to be taking place in this program. And I really think it's for the woman that is ready to reclaim and reignite that light within them and shine it onto the world.
Oh, it's beautiful. If people want to find out a little bit more about you and all the work that you're doing, I know you share those two resources, but where are you on social media? How do people find your podcast?
Yep. Erica Lippy, I Live the Most. And then my podcast you could find at Passion Love Pursuit on Instagram and Facebook. And then, like he mentioned, my podcast, Passion Love Pursuit, you could find on most platforms, on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and all the things. So yeah, I would love if anybody enjoyed this conversation or wants to learn more, just DM me, and happy to have a little chat.
Beautiful. Of everything that you've experienced in life thus far, what has been your best medicine?
I feel like there's so many things. My best medicine, if I could say two things.
Sure.
So one of my best medicines by far is walks in nature, sunlight. I always say I'm like a flower. I come alive in sunshine. There's this aliveness, and I know there's probably science behind this, but I feel so connected to who I am when I'm in nature and sunshine and just being able to walk and be with myself. So I find great peace with myself in that space. So that is one. And then I was going to say my best medicine is knowing myself, like really, truly connecting to who I am, because I really believe all we need is within us. And I'll add to that God as well. Having a faith, being a Christian also has been a powerful medicine for me as well. It has saved my life when I was, not to end on a bad note, but when I was suicidal, when I was a teenager, having a faith and becoming a Christian was a big life-saving moment. So just, yes, I would be connecting with myself and a higher power.
Beautiful. Erica, it's been such a privilege and honor to host you. Your wisdom on self-love, I find to be so important, and definitely one of the best medicines that I think people can adopt. So I thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today on the Thrive State podcast.
It's been an honor. So appreciate you. So many great questions. So thank you for holding this space.
I hope you enjoy that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if you're finding that this content is really helping you and your family members, please consider supporting our mission and our cause of elevating health, happiness, and human potential for people all over the world. You can do so by making sure that you subscribe to this podcast, sharing it with your friends and family members, and leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. All these things are going to really help elevate the show and to give us the resources to continue to bring more content just like this to yourself as well as the people that you love. If you haven't already, you might want to consider joining our community. We actually have a community where people get to engage with me in group sessions where we do breath work, meditation, where we do challenges together, really to be able to get us access to health, happiness, human potential so that we could have longevity and performance in our life as well. You can check out our community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. And if you haven't already, pick up a copy of my book, Thrive State. It really gives you all the tools, the pillars that you need to create a blueprint to control the energetics of your life. Who are you? How you show up in the world? The choices that you consistently make create an energy in your body, and you can control this. And when you can control that, you also control the messages you give to your DNA that gives you access, again, to optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. And let me also just share a free gift to you. If you haven't already, please pick up my longevity and performance bundle where I share lecture notes, ebooks, breathwork exercises, and longevity and performance resources at thrivestatestarter.com. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. Thank you for helping us grow. Remember always, my friends, that you are your best medicine.